Think back to the 2000s for a second. Do you remember when horror movies just seemed to get meaner? All of a sudden, the slashers you grew up with, the ones with that certain campy charm and a fun set of rules, were being dragged into the new millennium. Kicking and screaming from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre to Halloween, classic horror franchises were getting rebooted with a darker, grittier, and way more graphic style. Now, this wasn't just a one-off, it was a trend, and while there were still incredible horror films being made like The Others and The Ring, this new wave of brutal, in-your-face horror was impossible to ignore. It felt like an industry-wide shift that was starting to trade suspense for shock and atmosphere for aggression. The slick, almost playful horror of the 90s suddenly had a new, ugly stepsister. This new horror was relentless and brutal. So let's break down how and why the 2000s remake boom didn't just rehash old horror stories, but completely reinvented the look and feel of mainstream horror. To really get what changed, you have to see it. The horror of the 2000s wasn't just telling darker stories, it was shooting them through a darker lens. This was a visual revolution built on three things: how it used light, how it used gore, and its overall tone. First up, the darkness. In the 70s and the 80s, directors often used bright, clear lighting to build suspense. You saw the killer, you saw the environment, and the terror came from the waiting. The 2000s flipped that completely. Light wasn't just for seeing anymore, it was for hiding. This new style was all about high contrast cinematography that plunged huge parts of the screen into oppressive blackness. The perfect case study is the 2003 Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake. Directed by Marcus Nispel, the film is famous for its nightmare aesthetic. The cinematographer Danielle Pearl, who ironically shot the original 1974 film, deliberately moved away from the raw, sunny look of the first movie. Instead, the remake had an aggressively processed look that gives the effect of a bleach bypass, desaturating the color and crushing the blacks to create a world that feels perpetually damp, rusted, and decaying. Scenes are lit with single, harsh sources, like a flickering bulb or a flashlight beam, cutting through the gloom. The camera often struggles to find focus, making you peer into the shadows. Just like the victims, you don't see the threat until it's right on top of you, making you feel just as vulnerable as the characters. This wasn't just lighting a scene, it was weaponizing the absence of light. Next, and maybe most infamous, was the gore. The 2000s pushed horror from an exercise in suggestion to a spectacle of bodily destruction. Older slasher films often cut away, leaving the worst of your imagination, while the 1974 Texas Chainsaw Massacre is famously and surprisingly bloodless. Nispel's remake is an assault. It features much more explicit and prolonged scenes of visceral trauma. There's that iconic shot where the camera seems to pass right through the bullet hole in a character's head. The focus was now on splintered bones and torn flesh. This wasn't just an isolated incident. The 2009 remake of Friday the 13th was also from Nispel, has a Jason Voorhees who inflicts incredibly messy and graphic violence. The goal wasn't just to scare you anymore, it was to make you physically recoil. The rise in graphic content happened alongside the emergence of the torture porn subgenre in films like Saw and Hostel, and honestly, the lines between them often felt blurry. Finally, all this was wrapped into an atmosphere of suffocating nihilism. The horror of the 80s often had a sense of fun, like a roller coaster thrill. The 2000s stripped that away, leaving a world that was gritty, mean, and unforgiving. The settings were decaying, the characters were flawed, and hope was in short supply. Even a film like 2002's Halloween Resurrection, with its goofy reality TV premise, is dripping with cynicism. The contestants are just disposable content for a bloodthirsty online audience. The classic final girl trope wasn't so much replaced as it was complicated. Survivors were now often broken, anti-heroic figures who seemed doomed from the start. The new worldview was simple: no one is innocent and no one is safe. So why did this happen? The tidal wave of grim graphic horror was the product of a smart business plan, new creative talent, and the general mood of the world at the time. A huge part of the story comes down to one company, Platinum Dunes, founded in 2001 by Michael Bay, Brad Fuller, and Andrew Form. The company's mission was to give classic horror movies a glossy 21st century makeover. Their first project, 2003, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, was a massive box office hit, which proved there was money in old franchises. Platinum Dunes had a playbook, producing remakes like the Amityville Horror and Friday the 13th. Their house style, a crisp, desaturated music video polish applied to B-movie violence, became the decade's signature look. So when you put it all together, the 2000s remake boom was way more than just a lazy cash grab. It was a visual and thematic overhaul that dragged horror into a new, more brutal century by combining the business savvy of Platinum Dunes and the stylistic flair of music video directors and a culture steeped in anxiety. The decade forgot a new identity for mainstream horror. This era set a new baseline for on-screen violence and gore, shifting the focus from psychological terror to a full frontal assault on the senses. The lighting got darker, the gore got wetter, and the tone became relentlessly bleak. Films like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake weren't just retelling a story, they were translating it into a new aggressive visual language. For better or for worse, this was the decade that made horror mean again. It traded the grainy, suggestive terror of the 70s for the polished, explicit brutality of the 2000s. It was slicker, louder, and far more graphic. And while it didn't change the entire game forever, it left a deep, grimy mark on the genre that can still be felt today. So what do you think? Was the 2000s remake remake Boom a necessary evil that injected new life into the genre, or did it sacrifice real terror for cheap shocks? What was your favorite or least favorite horror remake from this era? Let me know down in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this little trip through horror history, be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and ring the bell for more deep dives into films that scare us. Thanks for watching.